Hi, Dan Dustin here. I'm going to try to answer some questions I've received from spoon makers who've been watching my videos on YouTube. And so here goes. It was a very interesting experience, one of you says, as I let it shape itself, as I ran into a knot in the handle that needed to be removed. It was an unusual feeling just to go with the flow. This is an interesting question. I believe that I let it just shape itself. But once upon a time, I was sat down by one of my enthusiasts who was a woman who knew her business. And she explained to me very carefully that I did in fact have a sense of design. And I still won't admit it. It pleases me to believe that I just let it shape itself. But that's maybe a good lie. And that is the lie that I recommend. It's a good sign if you said to me, I ran into a knot in the handle that needed to be removed. If the wood is speaking to you, then you're on the right track. What I do is I use a clam knife. It's an important tool for me, is a clam knife. It's not sharp, and it's obviously used traditionally for opening clams. The old ones are better than the new ones, of course. And I will remove any knot that I can remove with a clam knife, generally speaking, which means a soft knot. Normally a soft knot is black in color. A sound, S-O-U-N-D, sound knot is the color of the wood. And I won't carve out a knot. I will never, almost never, carve out a knot with a sharp knife. I will only work a knot out that is soft enough to move without a cutting edge. This is not a sharp tool. Can you please guide me to one of your books or a set of your videos that will guide me along the whole process? The answer is no. We've attempted books on 2 occasions, and I would be very happy to make a book if somebody wants to get in touch. Most of the groundwork is done. An artist in Pennacook, New Hampshire, made a whole set of drawings for a book with drawings and gave them to me. And actually my wife, who was holding the camera, outlined the book for a project when she was getting her library degree, and there's all kinds of photographs and videos available, and the book could be made if somebody wants to make one, and I would be glad to cooperate. But at the moment, there is no book. The same goes for a set of videos. There's plenty of footage, but nothing organized. And I don't want to do it, and I'm not going to ask my wife to do it, but if there's somebody out there who wants to, let me know. And I've said that twice, so that's often enough, I guess. The book that I have for sale, I don't recommend particularly for people who want to make spoons. Certainly is worth having. It was done for a different purpose, and the story is interesting, and I'll tell it sometime, but I can sell you one for 20 bucks, but the truth is they cost me 13, and by the time we packed it up and mailed it to you, it's pretty much a wash anyway, so kindly buy it with a spoon if you do. So, here are some more questions. How do you choose a branch or a spoon? The answer is, hopefully, it chooses you. If it's not choosing you, just do the best you can, and ultimately, you'll learn a lot. So be comfortable making lousy spoons until you find out what you don't want to make. You need to make spoons. A lot of these questions solve themselves once you begin to make spoons. You make some useless spoons. For instance, lots and lots of little branches on trees give you little ladles. Uh, you could make hundreds of little ladles. Those branches are all bent too much. And you'll find there's very little use for little ladles, and after you've made 6 or 7, you'll probably stop making them. This is the learning process. Do I soak them in water? If so, for how long? All right. Here is my story. All I can do is tell you my story. Norris Patch, whose photograph and some information you can find on my YouTube channel, which I suppose you're probably on now, in a presentation titled Introduction, taught me to make axe handles. And what he said was, you want to make your axe handle out of green wood, and you need to keep it underwater all the time you're working on it. Obviously, when you're working on it, it's not underwater, but in between the times when you're working on it, you keep it underwater to keep it green. And so when I gathered I switched from axe handles to spoons, and it was not a good environment to make axe handles in because chainsaws were getting better. It was the early 70s, and the demand for axe handles was not there. And I switched from axe handles to spoons, and so when I cut my spoons, split them, I cut the billets out of the trees, the bent pieces that were going to be hopefully split out into spoons, I put them immediately underwater. And then it took me so long to get them out that they were soaking for longer and longer. This was not my intention. It was just accidental. But I did discover that apple wood, after about 3 years underwater, seemed to behave better. And I said to the apple farmer, who lives 2 hills over, my family has known for 100 years, and he said, "Oh, didn't you know that? It's 3 years underwater for apple wood. I thought everybody knew that." So I discovered what the old-timers already knew, and I've made a number of discoveries like that. And hopefully, mostly the old-timers tell me, and I'm telling you. Carve the wood anytime but what I did was I carved the oldest stuff, the stuff that had been underwater. I just carved the oldest stuff first. And now I'm getting to the point where I have actually found some wood I've had soaking underwater for too long. And it's kind of punking out and not good anymore. So there is actually a limit. And this water is treated in no way. I have a barrel yard outdoors with, I think, 28 55-gallon plastic 55-gallon barrels tied together in groups of 7, 1 in the middle and 6 around the outside. If you leave a barrel of water outdoors all winter, it will fall over, because when it freezes, of course, the bottom swells and gets rounded and it tends to fall over. But if you tie 7 together with a piece of rope, they rise up and fall minutely, I suppose, but they don't fall over. So that's what I've come along to doing, and I label them by what's in them and when it was put in them, by scratching into the cover of a standard canning jar cover and hanging that on the barrel, which seems to be the best way. I've tried a million different ways. I've tried 30 different ways to mark barrels, and that's the way that works the best for me now. Someday maybe I'll take you for a walk. I also have in the cellar, right below where I'm sitting, 2 dozen 32-gallon garbage can type barrels. And every October, before it gets too cold, I clean them out and fill them from the barrels outside, and that's what I carve from. Though they're the oldest stuff, of course. I bring the oldest stuff in. I carve from those 24 barrels all winter and all summer, and then next fall I clean out the ones that are empty and rechange the water and put the oldest stuff from outdoors in there again. There is no treatment to that water. That water is just plain water. It just sits there. I don't change it. However, I do have 2 8-gallon containers in my shop, and that water is treated. It's treated with basically stuff you buy at the hardware store in a white plastic container that's made for cleaning your house. It's called by various names, and of course every time I go to buy it, the stuff I bought last time is no longer available, and I got new stuff. It's basically called Mold Blaster, often made by an outfit called Joe Max. And the trick is, it's to get the stuff which is made to destroy mold and does not have bleach. Because bleach, of course, will take the color out of the wood, and you don't want that. I don't measure how much I mix, it's just how I feel. Here's the deal. Once a piece of wood has soaked in water for some time, let's say a year or two, when you take it out, it will mold very, very quickly. Sometimes. Sometimes it'll mold in 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes overnight to mold, but it'll mold because that water, for whatever reason, that's the truth of things. So I take the wood out of the barrels, the untreated water barrels in the cellar. I split out the spoons and immediately drop them into one of my 8-gallon containers of treated water, which is labeled to carve. And then when it comes time to carve, I take them out, and they have been treated so they won't mold, and I do the carving, and then I put them into the other 8-gallon container, which is marked to fire. And they sit in that to fire container simply until there is enough of them to fill a firing. And at the moment, for most of my life, I'm firing in a turkey roaster, a Westinghouse cooker, one of those white square things with a knob on the front and the black handles. And I'll tell you that story in a minute. Let me see where we're coming on our questions here. Do I soak them in water? If so, for how long? Is it just water? Do you add something to the water? Okay, that's, I guess I've answered that part of the questions. How far do I shape the spoon? That's a very good question, and I'm still dealing with it. Generally speaking, we always carve our spoons too far. For many years, I labored under the assumption that once a spoon was fired, you didn't want to carve it anymore. That was silly. Once a spoon is fired, it's still wood, and you can carve it. So one point of view is all you have to do is rough carve a spoon to the point where you think you can fire it without it cracking. The thicker the wood is, the more likely it is to crack. So you got to get rid of as much wood as convenient before you fire it. But spoons warp and move around in the firing a good deal. And if you carve too much, you can get a spoon that after firing you can't smooth out without going right through the bowl because it's warped a little bit. And so you got to leave some substance. You'll figure that out as you go. The general answer to that question is we mostly carve more than we need to before we fire, but that's all right, mostly. Sometimes it gets us into trouble. When it gets us into trouble, we just have a reject, we have a spoon that didn't work, that's all. Remember the technique of the traditional, this is of course mythical, the traditional Japanese potter, make 100 pots and throw away 99. We don't need to be that extreme about it, but don't worry about a few failures. My answer to your question is just keep carving less and less before you fire. How far do I shake a spoon? How long do I soak the almost finished spoons? Are they soaking in straight water? No, they're soaking in treated water, and you only soak them as long as needed to get enough to fire. I'll talk about firing shortly. My best guess is after they have soaked for how long? Is that when you finish the spoon? Okay. No. The spoon, I finish the spoon, and I'm talking about myself here. I'm not worthy of this. I'm not worthy of worship. What I do is, from a business point of view, pretty silly, and there's no reason why you need to do it the way I do it. But I'll tell you how I do it. You want to know, and I think it's the best way, but I'm probably wrong. Okay, the spoon is finished after firing, and it can't be finished comfortably until it has sat for about a month. The way I fire them, and I'll tell you in a minute how I do. And then it is finished by the process of filing and scraping and sanding. Filing is done with, I do my filing with a 10-inch Nicholson cabinet file. I only use the flat side. I found the curved side to be useless. And then the file marks, it's all file marks. The file marks are scraped out with broken glass or a steel scraper, and then it's sanded. And I would recommend a beginner start with number 60 sandpaper, and I do myself sometimes. Sometimes I can get by with 80. And after it is sanded, of course that's the outside of the spoon. The inside cannot be filed, and the inside is scraped with a curved scraper, which can be a curved steel scraper. You can make your own. There's a very good article on scrapers in, I think it's July and August of 1980 in Fine Woodworking magazine by a guy who really understands them. Very, very few people understand steel scrapers, so it's a little on the tricky side. I'll think about doing a YouTube presentation on them, but it's only just occurred to me, so I don't make any guarantees. The inside of the bowl has to be just scraped. A broken wine glasses, a curved glass from broken wine glasses, or heat broken lamp chimneys are excellent, but it's hard to find that stuff. One of the most interesting things about being a spoon maker in the context in which I am a spoon maker is you always find yourself wanting stuff that nobody else wants, like broken wine glasses or mountain laurel, or big old lilac. And you keep hearing these stories about people who brought a whole bunch of the stuff to the dump or burned it in a brush pile, and you kind of have to live with this. It's hard to get stuff that everybody wants, like gold and diamonds and fine violins, but it's also hard to get stuff that nobody else wants, and it requires social technique, and it's part of the pleasure of being a spoon maker from my point of view, and I wish you luck with that. Okay, my best, okie dokie. I see that you seem to be boiling the spoons. It's true. I am, in fact, boiling the spoons. But I think probably it's time to just go through this. I know everybody is interested, and I think that probably you should mostly all be a lot less interested. My finish isn't that good. I get by with it, and it's what I believe in, I suppose, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But it all started with the French-style axe handle. Here's one in my collection. I learned this from Norris Patch, who was the last living member of my grandfather's generation and lived well into the 70s and taught me a great deal. As I say, check out introduction in my, also the From Tree to Beam, my most popular video on my YouTube channel, was all taught to me by Norris Patch. At any rate, notice how fine this handle is. You can see by my finger how thin it is. And it was split out of white oak. You can see these little pulley places here where the wood was split. And it is carved green, and it is cooked dry under crankcase oil. Now I could do a whole video on telling stories about crankcase oil. I knew an old timer, lived down the road, died when I was in my 20s, who worked in the woods, up in the Maine woods, where this technique came from. He was stripping pulp. Paper can't be made with bark, so the bark has to be taken off any wood that paper is made of, and the paper companies didn't care if you had a college degree or not, if you were willing to strip bark off of wood. And a lot of guys went up to the woods and stripped bark, and this fellow lived in a homemade cabin which was roofed with gunny sacks soaked in crankcase oil and chinked with gunny sacks soaked in crankcase oil. You can imagine what life must have been like. Just about the time, this would be the 1920s, 1930s, Norris was probably born around 1911 or 1915, right in there, and worked up in the woods when he was quite young and discovered this French style of axe handle. They were just introducing trucks, and trucks produced crankcase oil for free, and it was used for many things, including wood finish. So when I went from axe handles to spoons, I started out with pure mineral oil, which is essentially crankcase oil. You couldn't use crankcase oil today, of course. It's all full of poisonous additives and so forth. And you know, back in the old days, nobody cared anyway, but of course it was more pure. And what Norris did, the way Norris made his axe handles was because he was a professional blacksmith, he had a tray of free used crankcase oil beside his, looked like a window box beside his forge, and he would keep his axe handle that he was working on in that, immersed in that oil. And every day when he banked his fire, to bank a fire, you cover it in ashes so that you can stir it up and get it started the next morning easily. When he banked his fire, he would take the axe handle out and look at it and decide things and lay it across the fire on top of the ashes and let it kind of cook there all night. And in the morning, he'd throw it back in his oil, and the next evening, he'd take it out and look at it and decide which side to put down and so forth, and you know how straight it was and this and that. and lay it back on top of his fire, and that's how he made his axe handles. He never told me how the French Canadians did it, whether they cooked them in a pot or what. I did some axe handle workshops in the 70s. There's photographs in the presentation titled Introduction, where we just sat around a fire and basted them with a paintbrush and cooked them over the fire like hot dogs, and wore gloves and burned our fingers and just kept it up. One time I spent a whole night with a couple of potters who were wood firing their kiln and dipped my axe handle and basted my axe handle and cooked it on the heat of their kiln all night long. It didn't make them too happy. They were worried about oil falling in and ruining their pots and stuff. And I did that once. It was kind of fun. And I think my first piece I did in the oven, wood oven. I didn't know what temperature it was, but I made a bowl and I put it in as long as I thought I could stand it, and baste some more mineral oil on it and stick it back in. In those days, the only edible finish, the only finish for kid toys or butcher blocks or anything was mineral oil. And I suppose I was a pioneer of this edible finish. It doesn't prove mine's any good. There's dozens of them now all over the place. I got away from mineral oil just for political reasons. I didn't want to be involved in the oil business anymore. So I switched over to olive oil, which was cheap, and I could buy it for $8 a gallon at the grocery store. I used Filippo Berrio. I didn't like the green stuff, the whatever they call pure virgin olive oil, but the regular olive oil was kind of yellow and it didn't seem to hurt anything, and I used that. And I made myself a warm, I used a 32-gallon roughneck garbage can with a sick room bed heater, sick room heating pad underneath it, and you can see that in my introductory video on my YouTube channel. And I pull a whole bunch of spoons out. I'm being interviewed by Boston Chronicles, and I pull a whole bunch of spoons out. That's pure olive oil. About this time, I'm getting off the subject, I want to show you, I found myself, quite by accident, in, Tibbetts bookstore in Hollowell, Maine. And for $3, this was back a long time ago, for $3 I bought a 4-volume encyclopedia. And I can just show you a little bit of, this is heraldry. It's a pretty good encyclopedia, 4-volume encyclopedia called Johnson's Universal. And it was made in 1870, somewhere in there, and dedicated to Horace Greeley. And most of my researches, I go straight to this book first. And when I was studying finish to get into wood finish, my spoon finish, this is my personality, not necessarily your personality, is I didn't want to go to the hardware store and buy a book on wood finish. I wasn't interested in what anybody else was doing. I wanted to be original, and I wanted to be traditional, and so I looked up in Johnson's Universal Encyclopedia violin, because I knew that violins had fancy finishes, and I thought I would start there and see how violins were finished. And I read this article on Johnson's on violins, and it was beautifully written, no photographs, beautifully written by a fellow named Horace Petherick, P-E-T-H-E-R-I-C-K, and I found that quite exciting. Violins are finished in 2 layers. They have a soft finish covered by a hard finish. And that kind of interested me. And I began to read Petherick was a 19th century luthier, kind of famous. He wrote, I have a collection of his books now. He wrote a biography of Stradivarius and another biography of Guarneri. And notably, he wrote a book on violin repair, which as far as I know has never been reprinted. And this is like way back, well over 100 years ago. And this book I had discovered exists on clipboards. Photocopies of this book exist on clipboards in various conditions, hanging on the walls of most of your violin shops. You walk into a violin shop, you'll see this, these curly pages hanging out of a clipboard, and that's Petherick's book.